Welcome back to Resiliency, Lessons After Sandy. I'm your host, Jim Hooker, and I'm joined by a distinguished panel of guests who will give us a guided tour, if you will, of New Jersey's pathway back from devastation and into a more hopeful future. We welcome back to the program, Mathieu Nelessen, North Jersey Regional CEO of the American Red Cross, Cathy McCann, Chair of the New Jersey Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster, and in her day job, Chief Operating Officer of the Community Food Bank of New Jersey, and Keith Adams, Disaster Recovery Coordinator for the Episcopal Diocese of New Jersey and Newark. Thanks for hanging in there, guys, to the other side of the break. And when we last left off, Cathy, you were talking about coordination, some more about coordination between the volunteer groups in the face of disaster and post-disaster recovery.
Right. As VOAD, you're not going to hear that VOAD is going out. You're going to, again, hear that the Red Cross and Episcopal Church and Salvation Army are going out. We all do different things. We all have our lanes that we kind of stay in, but we coordinate that so that sometimes there's two organizations that do the same thing. So like feeding, both the Salvation Army and the Red Cross feed. The Community Food Bank prepares food, but we don't actually do feeding for individuals. So we would prepare the food and then give it to the Red Cross and Salvation Army, as well as Southern Baptists do also cooking too.
What kinds of numbers are we talking about when you say prepare the food?
In
Sandy, we had thousands, if not tens of thousands, who needed food.
Correct, every day. So for the food bank, in our commercial kitchen, we can cook about 10,000 meals a day on one shift and an 8-hour shift. If we ran 2 shifts, we could do more. But then the Southern Baptists come in with kitchens. They have mobile kitchens, and they can do like 30,000 meals a day.
Wow.
Matthew, over the course of the response, we delivered some of that really well-prepared food we delivered roughly 4.5 million meals and snacks out to folks who needed food.
Over what period of time would you say?
It's probably over the first 60 to 72, 60 to 90 days that we delivered.
Staggering number, 4.5 million. Where does it all come from? Who? Because the folks aren't charged, obviously. The people in the street, online, they're out of their homes, they've been flooded.
Some of that comes with our partnerships with the state and with the federal government. So if it's a federally declared disaster, that we get school lunch money, school lunch food sometimes, and be able to cook with some of that. So it's not the complete meal, but we may get the chicken, or we may get some meat that we can make sandwiches with, or whatever. So so there is some food there. Sometimes that's what we do with our donated dollars. We buy the food.
Go out and purchase it.
That's correct.
Right. And you'll coordinate.
Right. And because of the everyday partnerships too, and this is something I think that we can't overlook.
Right.
Is this idea that because there are partners, like for instance the Episcopal Church and several parishes have food pantries or feeding programs that are already affiliated with the Community Food Bank. So in a time of disaster, there's already food in the community. There's already an opportunity to. We had that in several cases where folks, so it's the age-old question: what do you do if you have a basement full of food and you're the only gas stove that works in town? And you've got a lot of hungry people. You cook it and you start distributing that. So not only is it the mass feeding, but the opportunities through the partnerships to feed folks in smaller numbers.
In fact, in a taped piece that we show along with our Life After Sandy project here of the television program, we have a restaurateur, Janice Sellinger, the producer there, found a restaurateur whose food was going to go bad, so of a high-end Mexican restaurant, and he fed that to the community, and I believe the statement was something about the community was dining on some of the best stuff you can imagine.
That's right.
So it didn't go bad, and I imagine you see that more often than not. in those types of situations.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And a lot of those supermarkets that were closed were calling us and saying, can you come pick up our food before it goes bad?
Yes? Wow. And
You
you
know.
took them up on that, of
Well,
course.
sometimes we
Sure.
did, but we didn't have power for the first 4 days. Ourselves,
Right.
the food bank didn't have power. So
Wow.
we
So who cooked the meals in those instances, or did you have your MREs?
we had
store of
MREs. We
or-
had we have some the Southern Baptists were in town and helping us because we knew ahead of time that the storm was coming, so they kind of staged outside the state and were able to get in here pretty quickly.
You
But we
say
had
the
other
Southern Baptists. Who are these folks? They come from
volunteers
down
from
south,
the Southern
I'm guessing.
Baptists.
Well, actually, Southern Baptists are
denomination. It's a denomination.
Yeah, it's a
sort of.
misnomer to call them Southern Baptists. They're a Christian church
Okay.
who are a particular sect of Baptists, but there's actually Southern Baptist congregations within New Jersey,
Jersey.
and
Oh, okay.
throughout the country.
So
But
there's-
they're as you know, there's like Independent Baptists and there's Southern Baptists, and
Right.
I'm not really sure. I'm not an expert on Baptists.
Okay, but they were helping backfill
Yes.
greatly, apparently,
Yeah.
because you've mentioned them
Tremendously,
several times.
tremendously.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that was the immediate aftermath. Now here we are, almost 2 years later, and we talked about at the top of the program. Matthew did. The Red Cross is still active. You folks are still active down in South Jersey. So, how would you, could you put a number on folks that are still in need of your services?
Sure.
And how much longer can you provide, or when do you see an end to this, if you will, in terms of special help for this particular disaster and its aftermath? Anybody?
Okay, sure, I'll
Yeah.
jump in. So, in my role, we're actually serving communities throughout New Jersey, from north to south, and we're dealing in the process right now. We support long-term recovery groups, which are groups of faith-based folks and nonprofits in the community who've come together. And I think we talked a little bit about what those unmet needs look like.
Sure.
And Matthew's organization is partnering with us in that as well. So statewide, I think this is something that we all struggle with, and that is how many people still need help and how long are they going to need help. And certainly it depends. We talk about the many faces of Sandy in this storm. So the face of Sandy in Camden was very different than the face of Sandy in Ocean County, for instance. So folks like in Ocean County that are dealing with rebuilding their homes and going through all that are going to be a much longer process. So they're probably those long-term recovery groups, and we're going to have to assist them probably 5 to 7 years, I think, realistically, before that our efforts are going to be over and those folks are recovered. Places maybe like Gloucester and Salem, they have a combined long-term recovery group called the Southwest Long-Term Recovery Group. Their goal actually is to be done on October 1st of this year. Now, do they want to be done and leave people,
High and dry.
high and dry?
Right.
No. They want to make sure that they capture everybody, but the truth is that the task of recovery there is not going to be as onerous. So, and I think everybody else is probably someplace in between on the continuum. But the reality is the further we get away when we're talking about donated dollars from a particular storm that's been in a news cycle, the harder it is to engage donors, the harder it is to find funds to continue to help people. So that's kind of a limiting factor.
One of the challenges is that, and we talk about it internally, we talk about it with our partners, is that if you were living paycheck to paycheck before the storm, it's really, really difficult to see a sustainable recovery path with all of the challenges that are going to be in front of a lot of these vulnerable communities. And that's really a challenge because resources even like ours are drying up. I mean, we've gone through 97% of our donated dollars. We've exhausted our move-in assistance program. We're going to be beginning to wind down our program in January of 2015. But we'll still have a role as convener, to work on these VOADs, to try to triage some of these clients to state and other nonprofit partners who do this day to day. So there's still a real opportunity, but the work is going to get harder now, for sure.
Yeah, maybe this isn't appropriate for this type of a setting when you say the low-hung fruit has been picked, but that's a phrase that people use and now you're really, because that type of work has been done, but now you're really having to get to folks maybe who are having a harder time of it. And
these are the most challenging of cases, and we're still talking about some communities that are even undocumented in some cases. That presents a whole new series of challenges. So the challenges in this low or this vulnerable community, let's just call it, they're huge and they're very complex.
But as Keith said, it's getting harder to raise money, obviously. It will be
Yes.
harder to raise money now. Has the Red Cross tried, or do you folks continue to try? Do you continue to put out an appeal? We still need more Sandy dollars to help people that
Sure.
that are in need.
And local communities are doing fundraisers
Fundraisers,
and
right.
things like
Still
that, trying
today.
to, and getting the word out and telling the
Right.
stories in the local communities.
So I think the difference is, Jim, is that so when you have a national disaster, a disaster that has national attention,
Sure.
Just naturally, the Red Cross and Episcopal Relief and Development and folks that have a national or international footprint, we don't even have to quote unquote fundraise for that disaster. We get spontaneous donations because people they understand that we're going to be involved in that. And then we move into
Matthew said, what was it, 270 million from
right.
around
I mean,
the country outside this area.
so in essence, the American Red Cross, for instance, and actually another major funder here, the Robin Hood Foundation, which has been a big player here. But you have hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's kind of a problem early on because you have to try to move that in a coordinated way, like Matthew was saying, to folks. And you got to think about, well, we all know that this is going to be, for instance, like Monmouth and Ocean counties, maybe up to 7 years that folks still need help. So we have to kind of look at that and figure out how we take these dollars and use them effectively. And then ultimately, as we talked about, is how do we turn that back into the community? So I know in my case, the Episcopal Church, we have very local presences in our communities and churches that are doing
at the
things.
parish level. Or
At a parish level, but then we also have a diocesan outlook, and then we also have a national church outlook, which is very different. So how to coordinate that, and that's part of my job, is how to coordinate those parish-based programs with our national program to effectively help the most people. And Matthew's got the same thing with his local chapters.
Yeah, and for us, I mean, we respond to 70,000 disasters a year across the U.S. So, we would work more to transition this recovery into a preparedness set of messages, into getting communities better prepared.
Let's
so
talk
we
about
can
that.
mitigate.
Going into the future. Talk
sure.
about what
Yeah.
some of your future plans are. For example, I understand you have a hurricane app that.
Yes, we have a suite of apps
Put out
with
a
9
suite of apps,
Suite of
okay.
apps. So we have the earthquake, first aid, pet CPR, tornadoes, wildfires that are going on in the West Coast right now. So it's a great little they're free. They're on Google Play or iTunes stores. You can just
What
download
do they do?
them.
What?
They essentially will give you all the resources you need if you are detached from the outside world on your little smartphone or your Android. Give you all the resources you need. So say, for example, if you're sitting next to someone, they're having a cardiac event and you weren't trained in CPR, you can pull up your app and it'll essentially walk you through step by step what you need to do, including reaching out to first responders. So this level of preparedness, we're trying to kind of work with our partners now that we have better partnerships with, say, state government, county government, nonprofit partners, to really infiltrate the community, to really get this preparedness messaging out, because this is a behavior change question. So we want you to be prepared for the house fire. So we want you to have your smoke alarm in place. We want you to have batteries in it. We want you to have a kit, a plan to reconnect with your family. We want small businesses to take our Ready Rating resource, understand their continuity of operations planning. We want to really kind of saturate the community with preparedness messaging. And the apps is a fun, cool, modern way to do that. But I think that's really going to be the focus of our work moving forward is how do we get our communities better prepared for big stuff and for the day-to-day house fires.
Cathy,
for 72 hours after any kind of disaster and you're in a shelter, if you don't have your medication, that's a disaster for you.
Yep.
So you need to remember to bring that. If you have a special diet or your child has special formula, you need to know to bring that, because you're going to get a heater meal maybe for the first 72 hours, because we're not going to put our volunteers, any of our volunteers, in harm's way. Those that are in the shelter are in the shelter, but nobody's going to go out and there's no place to get that stuff. So it's really important to do that. And the other thing I think is to build those local county VOADs so that communities are prepared, so that those groups are working together and talking together about their plans and working with their county OEMs to make sure that they're prepared, and that the county OEM knows who they are and how to call on
those resources are.
That's know what their resources
Starts
are. Sorry.
local and ends local, as you say.
Well, I mean,
Correct.
that's basically what the emphasis
With
of
the
our
VOADs.
program
Yes.
is we have a national program of preparedness that where we assist our local congregations to be not only a service to the community, but what do they do? I mean, we talk all the time about, so you need to be individually prepared. You have to take care of yourself so that you can take care of your family. So then ultimately, in our case, that when you take care of your parish as a family, and then how do you take care of your community? So a lot of times when we used to start with our U.S. Disaster program, churches they would be worrying about, how do we inventory the communion silver? That was the focus. And we're not talking about that because for
Right.
us, church is very important in terms of not how we worship, but how we serve our community, how we serve those folks that are a part of our extended family. So the question is, if you're a church and you run a daycare center and there's an emergency in your town, we've taken all these kids and on behalf of these parents, they're depending on us. So what do you do, when the lights go out? What do you do if there's a fire in your facility or some natural disaster hit the town? What is your contingency plan? How are you going to be open tomorrow for these parents that need that? If you feed folks and they're dependent on you for a meal, and we actually had this happen up in Keensburg at one of our churches, where, the power went out but there were still 150 people who were kind of on the lawn going, where's my
meals.
food? They depend on those meals. So our churches, and as we do social services, we have to be prepared as well. And that's one of our emphasis.
So a lot of it's in preparedness, not just for the volunteer organization, but also for the individuals who are impacted.
And corporations, just
Yeah.
about not creating that second disaster by not doing a food drive and just collecting things or clothing or whatever, or the firehouse. And also our financial donors. We need to educate financial donors, individuals and corporations and everyone else that, when you give money, it's not going to go right out the door, because then we're not being good stewards of your donation.
Right.
Because really, insurance has to go, that whole sequence of delivery really needs to happen. We shouldn't be spending our money until it's really needed. So if you have
Sometimes
insurance,
you're needed right away because insurance
yes,
takes a while.
for feeding and things like
Right.
that, absolutely. For sheltering, absolutely. But if you're waiting for insurance, or and if it's a federally declared disaster again, there is money there for staying in other places.
Yeah, I mean, it's important because ultimately we want to get to that unmet needs place.
Sure.
And we know that we're going to need a lot of resources for unmet needs. So if you have a funder who feel tremendous pressure to, we're not going to know what the unmet needs are month one or even year one. I mean, so we're really now just getting into a wholesale unmet needs process throughout the state and getting cases case managed. So it's difficult. But, understanding also is that you have lots of donors who are going to like an organization like Matthew's and go, well, I gave money, and what did you do with it?
Matthew wants to chime in here.
Yeah, one of the things this is an interesting conversation, because one of the things that we're starting to realize is that just like the work of the VOAD pre-disaster, the preparedness work also is you have, in some cases, really inconsistent messaging going out. And one thing that I'm going to kind of personally take on post-Sandy is to say, we have to play the role, the Red Cross has to play the role as convener to get these messages consistent, so we're not duplicating, so we can collectively say that we're impacting the 8.8 million residents that live here. We're impacting the small businesses that 40% of them never come back online after a disaster. So how can we be consistent about our messaging, not duplicate in terms of service?
Interesting, because you're talking about not only duplicate, you don't want to duplicate, say, food, beds,
Right.
sheltering. You also don't want to duplicate, or everybody gives a wrong or a different message, not wrong, but different in terms of marketing almost, is what it becomes.
In addition to that, I think about it as like layers of a cake. So you have to then say, let's take the vulnerable populations and let's layer them. And then let's take the elderly and the senior and the homebound and let's layer them. And let's layer the special needs and children in foster care. And let's start to identify, these are the hot spots in the state that we really have to be delivering this preparedness message. Extreme extremely consistently as a group because these are the communities, the pockets in our community that are going to suffer.
Would you say that this was a lesson learned from Sandy? Or I know you said you're thinking about this post Sandy.
I think it's a vision that's come out of Sandy that says, this is another area that we can really be great in terms of collaboration. We can really set the pace. What we did in New Jersey in terms of activating some of our recovery support functions was duplicated out in Moore, Oklahoma with the tornadoes. FEMA looked at some of the work that we did here, although perhaps not perfect, because I don't think it ever is, but they said there was some really good stuff that happened in New Jersey, both on the collaboration side with the nonprofits and with government organizations. Let's duplicate a lot of that stuff.
And what was that? Give us, say, a hard example. I'm not asking you to say 12th and Elm. I'm saying, was it what we talked about much earlier at the top of the show in terms of one group is not going to put a food service here and another group across the street? Tell us what FEMA sees that you did here that they wanted to do in Oklahoma.
That's part of it. So for us, selfishly, it's in the recovery support function. We were named, and we really advocated hard to be named as a co-lead in the housing recovery support function. So that carried on.
The Red Cross.
Yeah, the Red Cross and all the partners that help us do this work.
Okay.
That's something that carried on and seemed to have worked very well. There was, I think there was some improvement that could have been done here, but just that notion of having a lead organization that's a partner with FEMA in the housing that can convene developers and architects and public policy folks and the nonprofit community all around housing and had a solution around it as a whole. That was a really great outcome from a convening point of view that's carried over.
And I will tell you that on the food side, that we have partnerships with the USDA through FEMA. And during Irene, it was a declared disaster too, so we did get some food from the school program. Well, before this storm, we knew this was coming. We actually did, it took a couple of days during Irene, but we did an order, our chef did an order with the USDA so that order was ready to go if we got the declaration. So we did all the prep work, and so the government worked with us. You don't have to go through all that red tape later. We went through, it didn't get declared, it was going to get ripped up and thrown away, but it did. And so therefore, we could pick up the food the next day as soon as the warehouse was opened.
Wow, and that meant...
That's collaboration,
but
that's working and planning together.
Does that mean we need 600 pounds of cheese, we need...
Well, you have an idea of, nobody knew exactly what, but we knew how much food we had in our warehouse. We feed 3,000 kids every day a hot meal, not here, but we send it out, but we prepare that. So we had that. The schools weren't open, the after-school programs weren't open, so we knew we had that to start. We knew we had certain...
So you had a baseline of what you'd have to provide.
We knew had heater meals, we knew, so we would have a day or so to get, and we could get more. We could put a second order in once that happened, but all those relationships, as we talked about, and really, VOAD is all about relationships. It's about knowing your partners.
Like any other business, right?
Exactly.
So VOAD's been in business for quite some time. We're going back, so we learned things as far back as, from Hurricane Andrew, which was in the 70s. And so lessons learned as we take from each one of these things.
And that's where I'm going next with each of you. Lessons learned.
That we kind of look and we say, what could we have done better? But I just want to put the plug in for VOAD again, which is kind of our association that we have here. That provides the platform for us to go, gee, that didn't work very well. What could we do better and collaborate?
We had a gentleman in here earlier on another program as part of our Life After Sandy project here, who has a Facebook page that got 225,000, has now, and during Sandy had 200,000. Justin Osceola, Jersey Shore Hurricane News. So, you smile, you know it.
I like that page.
Are you guys part of it? You like the page.
Yeah.
Where is this type of VOAD and this type of emergency response groups such as yourselves, and then now you're even in it for the long term and the long-term groups, where are you in terms of social media, and is that something you swear by or not necessarily? Not in your instance?
Well, social media is a two-edged sword.
Okay.
There was a lot of rumors that went out that were false, that you can get $300 to replace your food in your refrigerator from FEMA.
I just have to interject to protect Justin's franchise, because he told us he had one errant report and he knocked it down before it
Right.
even got out.
Yeah,
So
it's-
just
Right. So those kind of
I need to put that out
local-based
there.
community things,
Yeah.
but sometimes people were putting things out on Twitter or things like that were wrong, that somebody heard
Right.
something, it wasn't vetted. So if you're putting it on your Facebook and it's vetted, then that's a
what
whole
about you
different
folks
things.
getting into the social media realm? Are you, well, you're with the app, so that's
Right,
some of that.
We've
We're
actually
in.
transitioned. We have a whole, it's called a digital doc down in DC. And we, not only, Kathy's right, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. It creates, social media creates a lot of noise. It gives you some good data, but you have to ground a lot of that data. So one thing that we do is we have this global network that we're actually proactively, when we see a weather pattern picking up somewhere like the tornado that touched down right outside of Massachusetts, outside of Boston, we'll proactively communicate to our network in social media to say, there's a tornado coming, download the app, get prepared, get your kit ready, be informed, look at the media, know where your family is, get your numbers, charge your phone, get some water. So we try and be proactive, and that's where social media can become a really powerful tool.
So we talk about all the time, right? is that,
Yeah.
you
We
know,
have just
so-
a few minutes left. so
Social
go
media,
ahead.
okay, social media is not a substitute for community.
Right.
So, I mean, it's a valuable tool, but it
And
doesn't
and
replace
especially-
community
well, and
relationships.
Some of the populations that you serve, like the elderly, for example, are not necessarily keyed in very well in that area, right?
Correct.
So we have just a few minutes left here. But before we go, could we just take a little turnaround in terms of what do you think were some of the most important lessons? What did you learn? What did we learn from Sandy going forward?
I think communities that had, if I can go first, the communities that had county VOADs were much stronger, got their long-term recovery groups up.
Volunteer organizations active in disaster. Go ahead.
A county group who was already communicating and talking together had a much better recovery. Money is not always there, but they were able to get up, they were able to coordinate, they were able to take care of their citizens. We need that in every county. And I think people see that now. And now it's our job to turn around and help them get those up and running, at least the ones that are not in the middle of still recovery like Ocean and Monmouth County. But there's need out there, people want it, and now we have to work together as organizations to support those counties, because the state is only as strong as all those counties are
Keith?
together.
And I would absolutely echo that. But I think one of the things that we've seen now, all of us as partners and working in this throughout the state, see that we need to have platforms for sustained recovery. We talked a little bit about that funding, and Matthew talked about how his organization is kind of rethinking the way they're going to deal with that. But a lot of states have moved now to a permanent disaster fund, if you will, that kind of is a partnership that extends not only the VOAD partnership, but also to the philanthropic community, the corporate world, that kind of says that, look, we know that there's going to be a disaster tomorrow, and it would be a good idea if we had some of these partnerships in place, not only to handle kind of the stragglers that we know are going to occur out of Sandy, like we had in Irene and some other disasters, but from day one to provide that kind of platform for the funding and the financing. And I think that that's a lesson that we're taking away from this and actively working
How do we
towards
solve
a
that
solution and how to solve that.
All right, Matthew, we began with you, we'll end with you.
Yeah, and
From your point of view?
my answer is it's almost 4 words. It's proactive partnership and sustainable relationships. And if you can build those things and be proactive and lean forward and really, really push, you're going to build sustainable relationships, and the outcome is just going to be much more positive than it could have been otherwise.
Couple of those with the 4 C's, which
That's
are?
Communication, coordination, collaboration, and cooperation.
I knew you'd get it that
Yeah.
time. Well, thank you very much. I'm afraid that is all the time we have.
Thank you, Jim.
So
Thank you.
Matthew, Kathy, Keith, thanks a lot for coming in. Thanks for
Thanks
taking
for
the
having
time.
us.
And I'm sure that we appreciate the work that you're doing, and that you will be helping the people of our state recover from a tragic and horrific superstorm in Sandy, and that's well appreciated all around. So I'm Jim Hooker. Thanks for being with us for our Life After Sandy project.